Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. Today, our topic is publishing your first book and elevating your thought leadership. My name is Andrea Sampson, and I'll be your host and guide today as we explore this topic with my guest, Dr. Angela Lauria. Angela is the founder of The Difference Press and the creator of the Author Incubator, the world's most successful program for writing and publishing exceptional expert books. As a late diagnosed autistic, she has drawn on her lifelong special interest in nonfiction to help almost 2,000 entrepreneurs publish and promote their books. Angela is also an author herself with 7 books, including a Wall Street Journal and USA Today bestseller. She has a BA and an MA in journalism and media affairs from the George Washington University and a PhD in communications from European Graduate School. She lives in Washington, D.C. Angela, welcome. Thank you so much for agreeing to be with me here today.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited for our conversation.
Fantastic. Angela, you and I, we had a conversation earlier this week and we just hit it off. And there was so many things that we were talking about. And I thought, I've got so many followers here on LinkedIn and on YouTube and of course our private Facebook group. And so I wanted to share some of what we had talked about with them because I think it's valuable. So I'm going to start maybe at the highest level and you can help us maybe to demystify this topic a little bit. So let's start off with, why is book publishing an important step in thought leadership?
Well, I think there are 2 reasons. I think there's the inside reason and the outside reason. So the outside reason is a little boring. I hate the phrase, your book is a business card, but your book in a lot of ways is what I will say table stakes to establishing yourself as a thought leader. So when I get a business card these days, I promptly throw it out. Because what am I putting in my Rolodex? I don't know what that is.
Rolodex, what is?
Yeah, what is that? But your book actually says to somebody what it communicates instead of just your contact info is, I have taken the time and energy to do the work to create a book on this topic. And that is a baseline for experts these days. The obstacles to publishing have dramatically reduced since I started in publishing in 1994. And if you are calling yourself an expert and you don't have a book, you really need to have a good reason at this point. So I won't say a business card, but I will say table stakes. That's the outside reason. The inside reason is the more interesting one. Because to write a book, you actually do have to do a lot of mental work to organize your thoughts, to catch yourself in maybe some contradictions that you didn't know were there, to make sense of certain paradoxes, to understand what your key teachings are, and to know your story, your personal story, be able to succinctly tell that story. Because you've had probably 10, 20, 30, 40 years of experience, and it's complicated and jumbled, but that doesn't work in a book. So the way a book writes you as a thought leader is even more important than the effect that the book will have on your thought leadership, ability to book stages, ability to close deals and things like that.
I love what you just said. The book writes you. And as you know, I'm in the process of writing a book right now. And it's been, I think I went into it a bit naive thinking, oh, it won't be hard. I've got all this sum total of knowledge that I've been amassing for the past 30 years. It should be easy. It'll just flow out of me, right? Well, yeah, I'm a bit naive. And what I've found, though, and I think it's exactly what you just described, which is the more that I get into writing my book, the more that I am, challenged and giving myself the latitude to really explore the topics that I have done in my life. I'm learning more about what I think, and it has been so interesting to me. And I can see my message not changing, but deepening and becoming more powerful and valuable. And I'm exploring new things. And I think that is really key. But, as a speaker's coach and as somebody who works with people on creating a succinct message, I'd love your take on a book and in terms of, does it have one message or does it have many
Mm.
messages? Because I know that I always say, you know, what's the one thing you want your audience to take away if they take away nothing else? Is that true of a book?
Yeah. So, yes, 100%. So, the first thing I want you to think about as you're going through this is that experts have many books. So, think of any expert that's in your space, somebody that you might compete with, or somebody who might be, I don't know, Malcolm Gladwell. Malcolm Gladwell did not write one book and then was like, well, check. Daniel Pink wasn't like, nailed it, got it, done. So the biggest mistake people make, especially with their first book, and I know we're kind of focusing on first book right now, is like that impulse or urge to like capture all of your knowledge in one book is a false that's like a false flag. That's going to throw you off. It's going to make it harder to write your books. So thinking of yourself as an author, changing that mindset of like, I am an expert that writes books. Most experts that write books write, I would say, one book every 18 months to 3 years.
Hmm.
Really prolific writers, it's about once a year. So this is just your first book. Now, you may not get around to books 2 or 3 or 4, but what one of the exercises I like to do with my clients early on is mapping out like 10 years of books or 15 years of books. So we'll usually map out 5 to 8 books that are on their topic. And so just by having that map there, you may never come back to it, but it can shut off that part of your brain, especially if you're a little bit neurodivergent or you're a little ADHD. And every time you start writing, you're like, oh, that's another idea. Oh, I have to include that.
Yeah.
Then you have an envelope. What I tell people to do is set up folders for each of your books. And when ideas come in, put them in the right book. Maybe you get to that book, maybe you don't. But one book solves one problem. And that was always true, but especially now, books have shrunk. So when I started in publishing, the average book length was 80,000 words. Now
Right.
the average is 40,000 words.
Oh,
So
wow.
short
Wow.
attention span theater, right? Like we're,
So can you contextualize how many pages is 80,000 versus 40,000?
it's like the difference between 150 pages and 300 pages.
Right, right. So
Yeah. Longer
significant.
if there's
Yeah.
graphics or workbooks, but yeah,
Of
it's about half the length. So there was within the last 10 years, we've seen a massive shrinking in book size. And it's sometimes referred to in the industry as the Chicago to San Francisco issue, which is that people want to get on a plane in Chicago, get off in San Francisco, and have read the whole book. So we're trying to write a book that you could read between Chicago and San Francisco.
So in about 2 to 3 hours.
Yeah.
It's really what it is, right?
That's what we're trying to do, and that's what people are more likely to buy and more likely to consume.
And
So
I'm curious, like when we talk about writing books, reading books, I know for me, like the work that I do, I'm constantly bombarded with information. I'm a speaker's coach, so I'm working with experts like you are. And reading becomes challenging because I've got so much information coming at me all the time. And I've changed, like you, I'm also neurodivergent. And so I have changed my brain because of the way that I work. People speak to me. And so reading actually is quite, I was a prolific reader all of my life. And in the last 5 years, I can probably count on one hand how many books I've actually read. But I listen to books
I was like, do you do audiobooks?
constantly.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, like, so as a publisher, how important are audiobooks today? And is that something we should be thinking more and more about?
Yeah, we should be. So listen, this is a conversation I have with my authors all the time. We offer audiobooks. It's an add-on. So when people come and do a book with us, they automatically get the ebook and the print book. But audiobook, they have to like pay extra for. It takes an extra 3 months. There's a bunch of technical things like they got to buy microphones and headsets and, whatever. We also sometimes hire voiceover talent, but then they got to listen to audition tapes. Like it's a whole new layer of complexity. And about 30% of my authors do it. Now, here's what's interesting. The 70% that don't do their audiobook, never mention it to me again, never think of it, it never comes up. The 30% that did it reach out to me almost daily saying the best thing I ever did was the audiobook. All my clients are coming from audiobook. All my listeners are coming from audiobook. All my revenue. Like I have an author right now who's making $15,000 a month from her audiobook, but her print and ebooks, she's making like $500 combined, like almost nothing.
Yeah.
So I'm like, it's funny because and this might be on me, I don't push audiobook. Like the way that I offer it to people, it's like, if you want to do it, you can. I love audiobooks. Maybe your audience is into it. Think about your audience. I'm sort of pushing it loosey-goosey, but the more and more, and we've been doing audiobooks, I think, since 2018. And the more and more we have audiobooks that have been out there longer, they're getting picked up even later. So it extends the launch of your book. It extends the legs of your book. So I don't know. I should be pushing harder, I think.
Yeah. And I would think too, like, because I think of my own consumption habits. Like I read probably an audiobook, at least probably once a week. I'm finishing an audiobook. Depending on my schedule, if I'm traveling, more, right? Because that's what I listen to the whole time I'm traveling. But what happens, of course, it's like podcasts. You're like, you finish one, you're like, oh, that was a great author. What else have they written?
What's
So
next?
you're going back in their catalog, so I might be reading their latest book, but I want to actually, where did that come from? So I can see how one would beget the other,
Yeah. And there's also more consumption. So I have heartbreaking news, and this is not a reason not to do your book. But what we find is 16% of books that are bought are read, even one page.
Wow.
About 3% are completed.
Yeah, that does not surprise me.
So this is why I say the thought leadership matters, because people see you have a book and they're like, okay, this is obviously somebody who's serious about this topic. The way it changes you matters. But in terms of getting people to read your book, most people will buy it and not consume it. They'll buy it and they'll hire you even, and they won't consume it. But audiobooks, people tend to consume. They don't. Like I got the shelf behind me. I have read all those books, by the way. But people buy an audiobook. How many audiobooks do you have on your shelf? Like most people listen to them.
You listen to them. Because if you don't listen to them, you don't want them there, quite frankly.
Right. It's like weird.
It's like, it's like, oh God, I hated that book. Get it off my shelf. So I send it back. The service puts them back. I'm like, take it back. I didn't like that book.
It doesn't have like the decorator component that physical books have or something.
Because no one else sees my audio shelf.
Right.
There's no advantage to it, right? It's only for me. Yep. And so, I go back and like, I'm re-listening to a book right now. The Rick Rubin, the Creative.
Oh yeah. So many people have recommended that one to me.
Oh, so good. So good.
Yeah.
And again, I think the other thing that happens when we get into audiobooks, I read that book a few months back. I came across a bunch of podcasts that featured Rick Rubin. And, so I was listening to the Malcolm Gladwell one, and I was like, I should go back and re-listen to that book. And so podcasts, audiobooks, it all connects. So tell me, when you start working with, prospective authors, how do you get them to start really defining those ideas and what should go in that book?
Well, that's actually, interestingly, the biggest mistake people make. So when people come to me, they want to talk about what goes in the book. And if that's what you're thinking about, if you're working on a book on your own and you're like, what goes in the book, you will almost certainly end up in a spin cycle and not write your book. It seems like the right place to start. It's actually the complete wrong place to start. Because what goes in your book will be completely different depending on the goals you have for your book. So just as an example, what most people tell me is New York Times bestseller, Oprah, and make lots of money for my book. That book, if we could get you a book that's a New York Times bestseller that gets you on Oprah and you make lots of money for it, that's a Mel Robbins 5-second rule kind of book.
Yeah.
You're going to write a completely different book than if you're trying to get speaking engagements or you're trying to get clients. Now, that's not to say Mel Robbins doesn't get speaking engagements and clients. It's just to say, if you want to sell a book to a traditional publisher First of all, we got to get your platform up. Second of all, they take on the legal responsibility for your book. So I was just talking to a client a couple minutes ago, and she is talking about like plant medicine journeys, but she's not a doctor. And she's not a doctor, she's not a medical and so she wants to recommend that people go on plant medicine journeys. And she's got a great personal story around it. Well, that's great, but a traditional and then she wants to have a Mel Robbins 5-second rule book and a traditional publisher. Right. She has no credentials. She has no following. I'm not saying she can't write that book, but a publisher can't back her. They're financially risking some lady. It's different than if you're backing Michael Pollan. It's different than that's a totally different financial risk. So she could be thinking all day long about the content she wants to include about her ayahuasca journey at Burning Man. But if the goal is a traditionally published book, then she has this amazing immigrant story, immigrating from the Baltics during the war in Serbia. Now that story, especially in light of what's happening in Ukraine, there is a potential to sell that. It's completely different content. So I know I sound like Simon Sinek here, but you really do have to start with why, not what.
Interesting. And so I'm going to take that example. So that woman who has, plant medicine as, really a passion, but she's got a really interesting origin story. Now, if she were to go to her origin story, because hey, she wants to be big, she wants to be picked up by a traditional publisher, she could bring her plant medicine journey inside of it as a personal
100%. Absolutely.
So she starts to gain credibility, even without credentials, even here, this lived experience. Then if she chooses, she wants to do that other book, that's at another time with a lot of background behind her, a lot of credibility behind her, a traditionally published book. She may still need to self-publish, but she self-publishes with a platform.
Right. Exactly. So so a lot of people tell me they want to do lots of things. She's like, it's a memoir, but it's a self-help book. And I want to give people like tools and advice and instruction. You can't do both. I mean, you can, and you could self-publish anything you want, but it's not going to get you the outcome. So unless you're just doing it as a personal expression experience, which is fine, have at it. But it's like people have mismatched goals that go with the outcome. Like I can tell you how to become a New York Times bestseller. I've had several clients become New York Times bestseller. We can get you there. It's going to cost a lot of money, and it's going to take you 3 to 5 years if you're starting at zero. So we're going to have to publish some other stuff. We're going to have to pitch magazine articles. We're going to have an author platform that we build. So do you really want that? If you really want that, we can do that. But then what they tell me is I have a course launching next month and I want to fill my course. Well, if you have a course launching and you want people for your course, let's write a client conversion book that's going to be used in what we call a book funnel, like as a lead magnet or free with shipping. And then we can get thousands of people to get your book. And we know exactly it's about 3% of book buyers will convert to your course if your course is between $1,000 and $5,000. So we've done lots of studies on this. We know exactly how to get you there. And so what's your actual goal? And I know you want everything, but one book at a time, one goal at a time. Then we scope the content that goes in it because the content has to match that outcome.
I love what you're saying, because really what we're talking about is ordering of effort, right? And it's priority of effort. So look, you want to fill a course, you want to get on the bestseller list, you want to be known as a thought leader. Those are all worthy goals, every one of them. Which one comes first? Because the one that comes first is going to be the driver of what you write and how you write. Because I can imagine that a book funnel, a book that's driving a funnel is going to be probably an ebook. It's probably going to be much shorter, and it's probably going to be much more specific to that audience, versus one that's going to get on the New York Times bestseller is going to be much more researched, is going to have a bigger audience, going to have a bigger message. So yeah.
Oh, and you know what's really shocking to people? a bigger message, but kind of a dumber message.
Yes, of course, of
Which
course.
is really hard. Like, people will come to me with these very complicated theories, and that is not gonna find its audience. I need a USA Today big idea. The One Thing is a great example, or Atomic Habits is a great example.
The
I
Mel
mean,
Robbins books, like
the
that,
5-second rule is a great
like
example. Like, it
it's a
needs to be
great book. I've read it.
so dumb.
Yeah, it's a great book,
So dumb.
but it's so specific. Like, it's so, I remember reading it and going, "Oh, I probably could have just read the first 20 pages and I got it." Right? And and again, nothing against Mel Robbins. I think it's a brilliant
No.
book.
And that's
But
what sells. If you want, people tell me I want to be a New York Times bestselling author, and then they tell me this huge complicated idea. And I'm like, well, do you want to share the huge complicated idea, or you want to be a New York Times? Because go look at the New York Times bestselling authors. They
yeah.
don't have ideas that complicated.
And like, even if I think, you mentioned Malcolm Gladwell, who I'm a big fan of Malcolm Gladwell. I read everything he writes. Why do I love his stuff? It's one message. And he just keeps proving it over and over and over and over and over. So we get it. We get it really deeply. We get it really clearly. And he's a great storyteller. So we don't mind him telling us stories and stories and stories on the same topic. We actually
Yeah.
love it. And
Yeah, I want to talk about that, because I use Malcolm Gladwell books in my teaching for people who want to be platform speakers, so actually paid to speak.
Yes.
Because all authors are speakers.
Yes.
100% of authors are speakers. You cannot write a book and not be a speaker. However, most authors don't get paid to speak, right? So if you write a speculative Civil War fiction, like, you're not going to get paid. No one's hiring you. But if you want to get paid as a speaker, Malcolm Gladwell's style of books are really good. And there are two things that we talk about. One is there's one big idea, and then there are at least 10 vivid and powerful stories that you, as the reader, if you were booking speakers, could imagine him telling on the stage. We want to hear the hockey player story. We want to hear the 10,000 hours Bill Gates story. Like, Blink is just 10,000 hours told through 10 stories that are super memorable. So you need great storytelling chops. Each chapter is its own keynote speech, but they're all on that same big theme.
Totally. And I've seen Malcolm speak, and he does exactly that. He takes his stories and now he tells them from the stage. The only difference, at least that I could see in, when I've seen him speak, is he gives you a little more detail, or he might give a personal anecdote in there about how he found that story or whatever. So you get a little bit of the behind the scenes, but you're essentially reliving his book.
Right. People are imagining someone's going to read my book. They're going to like it. They're going to call me and they're going to hire me to speak on something completely different or in a different way. So I'm going to, like, all people want, whether they're buying your course, whether they're hiring you as a speaker, what people want is for you to do the book for them.
Right.
So if you're a consultant, they want you to come into your organization and do your corporate culture book in their organization.
Totally.
If you have an online course and it's on how to set up an Etsy store, they want to do your book and set up their own Etsy store. If you have a platform speaking book and those stories are in the book, they want to hear those stories on the stage. So that's why what goes in your book can't be determined until you pick an outcome. And if you try and do everything, you'll kind of get nothing. If you do one thing, you'll get all the other related things.
I'm just looking at the time. We could talk.
I know.
Forever. Honestly, this is, to me, so powerful. And, I'm just noticing we've got one of my quotes on the screen there. I talk about stories being Trojan horses for ideas. And I think that is actually one of the things that books do really well, is they allow us to take our ideas and to insert them inside of it. And I think that's what you've just kind of shown us again and again throughout the last 25 minutes, is that, when we see ourselves, first of all, as authors, and then we get clear on why we want to be an author. Is it to sell our programs? Is it to share our world-changing ideas? Is it to create credibility and notoriety? Those are three very different reasons to write a book, all valid. Nothing wrong with any one of those. But when we choose one of those, then the idea itself gets communicated in a different way. And that's the thing, like, it might be the same idea. Mel Robbins, the 5 second, what is it, the 5 second rule?
5 second rule. Yep.
So the 5 second rule, like if it was a funnel book, that would be very different than the New York Times. Still same idea, how it's written, completely different.
And you get different results. And it's also how it's published. So once people tell me their goal, if you got a course to sell, then I really want your book out sooner because there's an opportunity cost. And that means you're probably self-publishing.
Right.
If you are really committed to being a New York Times bestseller, we have to go the traditional route, which means you have to build a platform to be able to sell that. And that is going to take longer. So you got to have some other way to sell your course or your consulting while we're waiting for the book to come out. So it can't be so specific to that course because in 3 years, you might be teaching a different course. You might hate it. Who knows?
Right.
So the publishing piece is a really important factor as well. And a lot of times people are trying to answer, how do I get a book contract? How do I get an agent? Should I self-publish? Is self-publishing valid? Before they even know what they want from a book.
And that's where I was just going to go. I think there are two last questions I want to touch on with you. One is, what are the different types of publishing and why are they important? And then the second is, and maybe it's related or maybe it's separate, what's the impact that cognitive AI, generative AI has on the publishing industry? Because I think there's a lot of authors that are thinking, well, aspiring authors who think, well, ChatGPT can write my next book. Or, or look, we don't need authors anymore because generative AI is going to actually do it for us. So, what are the different types of publishing and how is AI impacting the world?
Yeah. So quickly on publishing, what I'll say is, there's sort of a continuum from DIY self-publishing, which I want you to think of as building your own deck. Somebody's built their own deck. Like, that's cool. Use YouTube videos. You can figure it out. You're smart. All the way to traditional publishing where you get paid in advance to write a book. And that would be like hiring a contractor to do your deck, and they're going to come and build it and do the architecture and all that. But then there are a bunch of things in between. So you might work with the guy. You might have a guy who's working on his off hours. You might do some sort of combination, and that combination in publishing is called hybrid. And hybrid can look all sorts of ways, right? You could barter with the guy across the street. You could pay him a little, but also do some of the labor. You could do it all yourself and he could just tell you what to do. And so you'll hear terms like boutique publishing, indie publishing, hybrid publishing. All of these are different flavors, and really doing your research is important. Most author advocates will say traditional publishing, it's a little snobby, like traditional publishing is the only way. And I do agree with that on some level. If you want to be a writer, if your goal is to be a full-time paid writer, I'm going to push you towards that traditional route. But if you're an expert and you're trying to get speaking gigs or consulting clients or people to buy your coaching program or your products from your Etsy store, self-publishing is a completely viable option. It's going to get you a different outcome. And then looking for that middle ground requires like a lot of finesse. And I'm happy to talk to anyone here who wants to understand that a little bit more. From my perspective, they're all great, but they're all very different. And most people don't know what they got themselves into. Even when they get a big publishing deal and they're so happy and they got a $50,000 advance, but they don't realize they sold their IP. They don't realize they don't get to pick their title. They don't realize they don't get control of their cover. They don't realize that it's 3 years and they can't talk about this material in the meantime. So they don't realize they're hooked in for their next book, that they can't even self-publish a book within a year. Like, they don't know what they're buying and why they're buying it. Right. So even if they're getting paid, they're still signing the contract. So that's my thought on that. And then really quickly on generative AI, I think every single industry is going to be dramatically changed in the next 5 years. Publishing is no exception. Right now, it is chaos and confusion out there. So yesterday, Amazon announced that for authors that self-publish, here's a funny sentence, you can't publish more than 3 books a day. Is that a problem? Does that come up a lot? Let me just publish my 19 books today. Oh, it's Tuesday. Like, what? You gotta make a rule? What is
Wow.
happening? What
That's
is happening?
incredible.
So the flood of crap content is
Right.
going to lead to, I believe, and I'm going to use my crystal ball here, but much more gatekeeping and much more of a focus on the traditional publishers that have been less important. We're going to have way too much content out there, and gatekeepers are going to become important again. And we really need new strategies around that. And at the same token, there are ways that AI can really help authors answering these questions. So I think it's about navigating the new world. I just wrote a book on this, which is free on my website, so you guys can track it down. But I wrote a book on this called The Equalizing Quill, and it is specifically about how AI can help underrepresented people get more attention in publishing. So women, neurodivergent people, people with chronic illnesses, people of color. Specifically, there is a very big opportunity for people who have been underrepresented in publishing that AI presents. And what I compare it to is what happened with the typewriter. So people went nuts when the typewriter came out because you had to be like a friar with a quill.
Right.
And now all of a sudden, like, ladies were just going to be able to write books. Like, what was going to happen? And so what really happened was a democratizing effect of writing, just like the printing press had a democratizing effect of reading. And that really changed everything. I tell a story in there about how the typewriter was actually an assistive aid for blind people.
Yes. Yeah.
And it used to be like a ball. And so I tell the story of Nietzsche going blind and getting his first typewriter and realizing that it changes the way you think.
Right.
Because of the way a typewriter works. When you write by hand, you're thinking slower. It's harder to go back. With a typewriter, you can go back. So AI is going to change the way we think in the way that typewriters change the way we think, and computers and being able to edit on a word processor has changed the way we think. And so understanding how you can take advantage of that, I think, is really key. I saw the link to the book was there. So it's $10 on Amazon, but you can get it for free on my website.
So we're a little over time, but I want to I want to make sure that our listeners get a chance to connect with you, Angela. This has been, honestly, first of all, this has been incredible. I think there's so much knowledge here. And as you know, I have an online program called the Thought Leader Academy. I would love to invite you to come into the academy, because I think my students would really, really, benefit from hearing not just what we talked about today, but actually going a bit deeper. And so I would love to invite you there. But before I give a little bit of information to these listeners on the Thought Leader Academy, because anyone might be interested in that, I'd love to know how they can keep in touch with you. I know we've had a couple of things on screen, but would love to hear you saying, where is it that they can find you? What is your program? And what can they expect from that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the hands down best place to find me is at Difference, like make a difference, differencepress.com. You're going to find my books are free on there. You'll find a bunch of videos and free trainings and all that stuff there. I have a free Facebook group where I do a monthly free coaching call. And you can ask me any questions about your book and get some book strategy from me. You can find that again through our website or at differencemakersclub.com. And that is a great way to learn more. There's a contact form. Feel free to reach out to me, get on my calendar if you want to talk about book ideas or what your strategy is. I have a range of services. My favorite thing to do is really answering some of these hard questions of why am I doing this book? What goes in it? Should I write a book now? How do I get started? How do I get organized? That's one-on-one coaching with me. But then I also have a team that's been with me for over a decade that does editing, publishing services, marketing services, launch services. We help people get bestseller status depending on what their goals are. So we can always talk about those things too.
That's amazing. I mean, in the last half an hour, we started off talking about publishing your first book and elevating your thought leadership. And I've had so many aha moments, from, everything from your book is your business card, like that as a concept, even though it may not always be true, there is an element of it that's true, and that your book writes you. And I think that's such an important piece, that you can actually take the time to write out 10 to 15 years of books. Wow. That one really blew me away, because as you said that, I was like, wow, what would be my next 10 to 15 years of books, right? I can imagine, as I'm in the process of writing this book, what could be my next book. The fact that only 16% of books are actually read, which is painful. But at the same time, I think important to know, we write books so we can have the book write us, so we can actually take from it what we need. And then it's a bonus when others actually take something from it as well. And finally, what are your goals when you're writing a book? Know that first. These were big ahas. And I think anyone who is listening, who is in the process of defining their own thought leadership, of trying to understand where a book plays into it, I hope that you got some big ahas, because I certainly did. And that one, what are your goals? I'm going to say that is the place you start. What do you want your book to do? And then from there, then start thinking about where. And clearly, Angela is the de facto person to go to, because she clearly knows this industry, but more importantly, she knows authors, and she knows how to get authors to the point where they're reaching the goals that they want to reach. Her program is available for anyone who's interested in that, and she's made some really generous offers here today that will really help any of you. And if any of you are interested in taking the next step in your thought leadership, book publishing might be one of the steps along the way, but also our Thought Leader Academy is also opened. And our Thought Leader Academy is a group coaching program, a membership program where we meet every week with thought leaders, going through group coaching and expert-led training 4 times a month. And we're opening it up to our listeners today for just $1 for a 1-week session. Come in, join our coaching. Check it out. We've got some really great guests coming up. If you were on my last LinkedIn Live, Andrea Rendell, who talked about developing your signature program, she's our next, she's doing a coaching session on outlining your signature program as your roadmap for creation. That's next Thursday. So if you sign up today, you're going to be working with Andrea. And in fact, I know Angela, you know Andrea.
She's amazing.
She's the bomb. Honestly, she's amazing. October 5th, I'm going to be coaching that week with your core message, taking you into what is your core message and revisiting and refocusing that core idea and how your story holds it. On October 12th, we've got one of my favorite coaches in our team, Ian Keeling. Ian is Second City alum and an award-winning science fiction author. And he's going to be talking about navigating interviews and panel discussions. And so we've got some great topics coming up. Make sure you sign up. It's $1. Come on. What do you got to lose? And join us. Come to our next session, and I guarantee you will want to stay. Thank you so much for your time today. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Angela, for being here, for sharing your wisdom, for being so generous with your time and with your knowledge.
Thank you so much for having me.
And with that, we'll sign off. Thank you again. Have a wonderful Friday and the rest of your weekend.